Today we're making the crispiest fish and chips I've ever had using this beautiful bastard trumpeter. And yes, believe it or not, that is its official name. If you're in New Zealand, you'll also know these guys as copper Moki. Jumping in, we're pretty blessed with some clear blue water. And first up, I'm going to uncoil my rig line. And I like to keep this neatly wound up despite what you might be thinking seeing all those knots. This just helps to keep things under control while I'm accessing the spot and entering the water. Once it's all set up and clipped off to the gun, we're ready to load. As you pull your bands back, you may notice the shooting line tuck underneath. I always make sure to return that back from under the band. Recently, Rob Allen released a really good video series explaining how this little bit of line management can help reduce muzzle wrap dramatically. It's made a huge difference for me, meaning more fish in the esky. We started off the day with a nice little salmon in the shallows. These wee fellas love getting up in the wash. I'm sure they're chasing all the little fish that are getting knocked around in there. Also known as Kahawai in New Zealand, it's probably a better name for them as they actually have no relation to true salmon. Some Aussies don't like them, but the Kiwis know what's good. There's beautiful meat in these fish when they're brained and bled. You can check out all of this in my full fish handling and prep video, Dry Age Fish at Home. Not far from the salmon in the shallows, I spotted some yellowfin bream, and I breathed up and dropped down into this little bowl area behind the boulder, very close to the fish. I didn't quite make it to the bottom, so I'm a very aggressive presence in the water, and you can see it doesn't want anything to do with me. Lucky for me though, it runs behind this boulder and gives me just a second of cover behind it to better line up and take a shot. Out wider, we were lucky enough to encounter a massive school of cow-nosed rays. Jace dives dropping down here, making sure to keep some distance. These graceful rays have 1 to 2 serrated spines on their tail, and you wouldn't want to get yourself Steve Irwin. Getting to around 130 centimeters or 4.2 feet wide, these are not small animals, and it's pretty impressive seeing so many of them together. In this frame alone, I can count 50 rays, with plenty more off camera. Now for the main event of the evening. I spotted this bastard trumpeter hiding down there in this little gutter. Despite having a reputation for being quite placid, I'd already spooked 2 on a previous session. A little too confident and maybe even lulled into a false sense of security. I dropped down here and really should have got deeper down into the weeds. As I came in, the fish started to make its exit, but I saw just enough of an opening to get a shot off into the body. Real nice dive. The old bastard trumpeter, of course, a nice salmon, a small bream just over minimum size, and a little goat. No clips of the goat, unfortunately, so here's one that I shot recently in some filthy water that we've got right now. Let's start with some standard old potatoes, give them a scrub, and then slice them up on the mandolin. Once that's all done, we'll soak the chips in some cold water. Yes, this is my kettle, but the water is in fact, believe it or not, cold. Soaking the potatoes is going to pull out any starch that will stop your chips getting super crispy. Some people recommend a few hours, but these are pretty thin. I only soaked them for 30 to 45 minutes and they came out alright. We can't be without a little tartar sauce to lubricate the whole thing. Some whole egg mayo first, and I prefer this to the Japanese Kewpie for some applications as it's far less sweet and also has a richer flavour, I would say. Some capers up next, and we'll give these a little rough chop and chuck that on top of the mayo. Some pickles and a sad little pile of dill from the jar. Unfortunately, the supermarket didn't have any fresh dill, so we're just trying to make it work here. Scrape off some lemon rind, a little chop, and then we'll dump that in. A wee squeeze of lemon juice and a wee spoon of pickle brine. Give all that a good mix, a light sprinkle of tarragon, and then we'll save it at the end with some dried dill. Bang. Filleting the fish and we'll keep it real simple. Like in any of my videos, using my favourite filleting knife, the 6-inch Victorinox curved boning knife. Link for that is down below. We'll take the head and the wings off first to make the fish more manageable, and then running the knife down along the spine, we're going to separate the fillet and eventually cut through the rib bones. Wipe up any blood or mess with some paper towel, and then we're good to go. No using fresh water here. Repeat all of this for the other side, skin the fillets, and then remove the ribs. I cut behind the pin bones here and remove the whole belly section, ribs included. As the belly meat is so thick on this fish, I can remove that and save it for another meal. Next, I'm portioning up the fillets, removing any meat that seems too thin so I can ensure everything is going to cook evenly. These trims will go with the belly meat to be used elsewhere. Get a big mixing bowl and let's mix up our super crispy secret sauce, a 2-to-1 ratio of plain flour and corn flour. The corn flour is going to help us get a super crispy crunch, and a couple of scoops of baking powder will give us a light, puffed up crust. Now mix in some cold beer. Again, it's going to help us to lift that crust, and the sugars in the beer will give us some beautiful caramelization to both the flavor and the color of the butter. Keep adding beer slowly until you reach a consistency something like pouring cream. Thin enough that it won't leave a heavy batter, but thick enough to still leave a coating on the fish. Next, I'm going to make sure our chips are ready to go. Out of the water and on top of some paper towel so we can make sure they're nice and dry. The more moisture, the less crispy. Don't forget that. There's probably a ton of ways you can do this, but I just layered them with paper towel in between. Let's get the pan set up. No fancy fry to control temperature here, so a vital bit of kit is this thermometer that you can make out just in the top right. It's super important to monitor your oil temperatures to ensure a proper crispy crust. As you put things in the oil, the temperature will drop, and low temps means soggy frying. And on the other end, too hot and you'll burn the oil, leading to brown, bitter fish and chips. Link for the thermometer that I use is down below. We want to see our oil hover at around 170 Celsius or 330 Fahrenheit. Pretty straightforward now. Let's drop the fillet into our butter mix and let it sit for a sec to get nice and coated. Then let's gently drop it into the oil. Do not drop it. Remember, this oil is super hot. Something else to keep in mind is having a pot big enough to handle the oil. You can see here just how much it bubbles and steams when I put the fish in. You don't want to overfill your pot, otherwise the oil will bubble over. Let's skim all the little crispy pieces out, and if these stay in too long, they will burn and affect the taste of the oil. Toss with some salt. They're also super tasty little treats, and I love using these little pieces to top off some dishes. After a few minutes, let's take the fish out and chuck it on a wire rack to drain. You want to salt this as soon as possible in order for the salt to kind of stick. These pieces don't need long. Fish is a rather delicate meat and it will quickly steam itself inside the butter. Remember, it will also continue to cook even once it's on the rack from residual heat. I'm going to repeat the whole process here for our other piece. I didn't want to overload the oil too much here, so we'll do them one at a time. While that's cooking, let's start frying some of our chips as well. Slowly dropping a few in and stirring them around with the slotted spoon to get them evenly cooked. As they start to crisp up and brown, let's get them out of there and chuck them straight in a bowl with some paper towel to catch any leftover oil. Don't crowd them too much or cover them now because they'll end up all soggy. Let's get the other piece of fish out now and let's bang in the rest of the chips. Again, stirring occasionally to get an even cook. I'm going to quickly chop some rosemary from the garden, ready to go on top. We'll test a couple of chips, of course, and then get the rest of the chips out. And while they're still hot, let's throw that rosemary and a sprinkle of salt in. Then we'll give them a toss. Get yourself a nice rustic dish and lay some paper in there. Spoon some sauce into a nice little bowl, and then let's drop in our super crispy fish. Add some of those beautiful chips to the mix, topping them off with some extra goodies that were left in the bowl. And there it is, the crispiest fish and chips I've ever had.